Williams smiled slightly. No, sir. The uniform is earned through months of training and is worn only by qualified soldiers. But you would assume the position and responsibilities of a guard for a brief time, which is honor enough. Marcus looked over at Sarah, who was watching him with an expression he had never seen before. It wasn't embarrassment or frustration, but something that looked almost like hope. She seemed to be silently encouraging him to accept the guard's unexpected offer. I don't deserve this, Marcus said honestly, his voice much quieter than it had been all morning. I've been acting like a complete fool, and I've been disrespectful to you and your fellow guards. Recognition of one's mistakes is the first step toward making better choices, Williams replied wisely. I'm offering you the chance to understand what you were mocking, not as punishment, but as education. Marcus took a deep breath and made a decision that would change his perspective forever. Okay, he said simply. I accept your offer. Please teach me what it means to be a Queen's Guard. The crowd erupted in quiet applause and excited whispers as Marcus prepared to experience something that no tourist had ever been offered before. He had no idea how difficult the next few minutes were going to be, or how much they would change his understanding of duty, respect, and personal responsibility. Guard Williams began Marcus's impromptu training with the same patience and professionalism he would show to any new recruit. The crowd of tourists watched in fascination as the loud, disrespectful American was about to learn what it really meant to serve as a royal guard. First, we must establish the proper stance, Williams explained, moving to stand beside Marcus. Your feet should be positioned exactly shoulder-width apart, with your weight evenly distributed. Your spine must be perfectly straight, as if an invisible string is pulling you upward from the top of your head. Marcus tried to follow the instructions, but his casual slouching posture made it difficult to achieve the military bearing that Williams demonstrated effortlessly. His shoulders kept rolling forward, and his back felt strained from trying to maintain the unnaturally straight position. Shoulders back and down, Williams corrected gently. Your chest should be open and proud, but not puffed out like a cartoon character. Think of dignity and strength, not showing off. It took several attempts before Marcus could even approximate the correct posture. His body was not accustomed to such precise positioning, and muscles he had never thought about before began to ache from the unfamiliar demands being placed on them. Now your arms, Williams continued. They hang naturally at your sides, but your hands must be positioned exactly right. Fingers together, thumbs aligned with the seam of your pants, no movement whatsoever. Marcus had never realized how much his hands normally moved and fidgeted throughout the day. Keeping them completely still felt almost impossible, and within minutes he was fighting the urge to flex his fingers or adjust his grip. Your eyes must focus on a fixed point straight ahead, Williams instructed. Pick something in the distance, and never let your gaze waver from it. No looking at the crowd, no following movement, no blinking more than absolutely necessary. This instruction proved to be perhaps the most difficult of all. Marcus was used to constantly scanning his environment, making eye contact with people, and reacting to everything that happened around him. Maintaining a fixed stare felt unnatural and almost uncomfortable. Breathing must be controlled and minimal, Williams added. Deep, slow breaths that don't cause visible movement in your chest or shoulders. Your entire body must appear completely still and controlled at all times. Within the first few minutes, Marcus began to understand why the guards looked so impressive and why their discipline was respected around the world. What appeared to be simple standing was actually an incredibly demanding physical and mental exercise that required constant concentration and self-control. Sweat began to form on Marcus's forehead as he struggled to maintain all the requirements simultaneously. His legs started to shake slightly from the unfamiliar strain of perfect posture, and his neck ached from holding his head in exactly the right position. Remember, Williams said quietly, you are no longer Marcus the tourist. You are representing the crown, the military, and centuries of British tradition. Every person who looks at you should see dignity, strength, and unwavering dedication to duty. These words had a profound effect on Marcus. For the first time in his life, he was being asked to represent something larger and more important than his own entertainment and comfort. The responsibility felt both terrifying and strangely meaningful. Marcus felt a growing sense of shame as he realized how his behavior must have appeared to this dedicated soldier and to all the other people who took these traditions seriously. Every person who serves as a Queen's Guard does so voluntarily and with pride, Williams concluded. We believe in the importance of our role and the values we represent. We hope that visitors will come to understand and respect what we do, just as we try to understand and respect the different cultures and backgrounds of the people who come to visit us. The courtyard remained silent as the guard's words hung in the air. Marcus knew that he was about to be offered something that very few tourists ever experienced, and he was beginning to understand that it was an honor he definitely did not deserve. After finishing his explanation about the duties and responsibilities of a Queen's Guard, Williams looked directly at Marcus with an expression that was both serious and surprisingly kind. The crowd of tourists remained completely silent, sensing that something important was about to happen. Sir, Williams said to Marcus, I have an unusual proposal for you. Would you be willing to experience what it actually feels like to stand guard here at Buckingham Palace? Marcus's jaw dropped open in shock. He had expected to be arrested, fined, or at least thrown out of the palace grounds for his disrespectful behavior. The last thing he had anticipated was being offered a chance to actually participate in the very tradition he had been mocking. You want me to do what? Marcus asked, certain he had misunderstood the guard's offer. I would like to give you the opportunity to understand what we do by experiencing it yourself, Williams explained patiently. Under proper supervision, of course, and only if you are genuinely interested in learning rather than creating more entertainment for your social media accounts. The crowd began to murmur with excitement. Many of them had been visiting royal sites for years and had never witnessed anything like this extraordinary offer. Camera phones appeared as people prepared to document this unprecedented interaction between a royal guard and a disruptive tourist. Sarah pushed closer to the barrier, hardly believing what she was hearing. She knew Marcus well enough to recognize that he was genuinely surprised and, for once in his life, completely unsure of what to say or do. I don't understand, Marcus said slowly. Why would you want to help me after the way I've been acting? I've been nothing but rude and disrespectful to you and everything you represent. Williams nodded thoughtfully. That's exactly why I'm making this offer. I believe that most people who mock our traditions do so because they don't understand what we actually do or why it matters. Education and understanding are better tools than punishment for changing hearts and minds. Palace security officers had gathered nearby, clearly curious about this unusual situation. One of them approached Williams and spoke quietly with him for several moments. After their brief conversation, the security officer nodded and stepped back, apparently giving permission for whatever Williams had planned. If you accept my offer, Williams continued, you will need to follow my instructions exactly and show proper respect for the position you would be temporarily assuming. This is not a game or a photo opportunity. It would be a genuine chance to understand what we do and why we do it. Marcus looked around at the crowd of people watching him, then back at the patient face of Guard Williams. For the first time since arriving in London, he felt genuinely uncertain about what he should do. Part of him wanted to make another joke and continue his performance for the cameras, but something in the guard's sincere offer made him hesitate. What would I have to do? Marcus asked quietly. You would stand at attention in the proper position for a short period of time, Williams explained. I would teach you the correct posture, where to look, and how to maintain the discipline required for the role. You would experience firsthand what it feels like to represent something larger than yourself. The offer was unlike anything Marcus had ever encountered. He had spent his entire adult life avoiding serious responsibilities and making jokes about things he didn't understand. The idea of actually trying to do something with dignity and respect was both terrifying and intriguing. Would I get to wear the uniform? Marcus asked, still not entirely convinced this was really happening. Guard Williams continued his explanation, and Marcus found himself becoming genuinely fascinated by what he was hearing. The guard's voice carried easily across the courtyard, and other tourists stopped their own conversations to listen to this rare educational opportunity. To become a Queen's Guard, we must complete months of intensive training, Williams explained. We learn military skills, weapons handling, ceremonial procedures, and physical conditioning that would challenge most professional athletes. The selection process is extremely difficult, and many candidates don't make it through. Marcus had never considered that these guards might be elite soldiers rather than just ceremonial figures. He had assumed they were chosen mainly for their height and ability to stand still, not for their military skills and training. We study British history, royal protocols, and emergency procedures, the guard continued. We must be prepared for any situation, from terrorist threats to medical emergencies involving tourists. Our training never really ends because our responsibilities are constantly evolving. The crowd was growing larger as word spread through the palace grounds that one of the guards was actually speaking to visitors. People who had been touring other areas began to gather, creating a small audience for this impromptu lesson in British military tradition. Each of us serves as both a symbolic protector of the monarchy and a real security presence, Williams explained. We are trained soldiers first, ceremonial guards second. The stillness and discipline you see is not just for show. It represents our readiness to respond to any threat or emergency that might occur. Marcus felt his earlier confidence and smugness beginning to crumble as he realized how ignorant and disrespectful his behavior had been. These guards were not entertainment for tourists. They were highly trained professionals doing an important and demanding job. The rifles we carry are not props, Williams continued, gesturing to the weapon he held with practiced ease. They are fully functional military weapons, and we are qualified to use them if necessary to protect the royal family, the palace, and the public. This information shocked Marcus more than anything else he had heard. He had assumed the guns were fake or at least unloaded, meant only to look impressive for photographs. We work in all weather conditions, the guard went on. Rain, snow, blazing heat, freezing cold. We stand at our posts for hours at a time without breaks, maintaining perfect posture and alertness throughout our entire shift. Marcus remembered his own struggles just to stand still for a few minutes during silly photo opportunities. The idea of maintaining perfect military posture for hours seemed almost impossible to him. The discipline required is both mental and physical, Williams explained. We must ignore distractions, discomfort, and even pain while remaining constantly alert for any potential security threats. It requires a level of focus and dedication that takes years to develop properly. Sarah had moved closer to listen, and she could see that Marcus was genuinely absorbing what the guard was telling him. His usual joking demeanor had been replaced by serious attention and what looked like growing respect. Our uniforms represent centuries of British military heritage, Williams continued. Every element has historical significance, from the colors and patterns to the specific way each piece is worn and maintained. We spend hours each day cleaning and preparing our equipment to meet the exacting standards required. Marcus looked at the guard's perfectly pressed red tunic, the gleaming buttons, and the spotless white belts and straps. He began to understand the amount of work and attention to detail that went into maintaining such a flawless appearance. We are not just individual soldiers, Williams explained. We are part of an unbroken tradition that connects us to generations of British military service members who have protected this institution and these values. When tourists see us, they are seeing a living representation of British history and dedication to duty. The guard paused for a moment, letting his words sink in before continuing with what would be the most important part of his explanation. We understand that visitors come here to learn about British culture and to have memorable experiences, he said, looking directly at Marcus. We welcome respectful interest in our traditions and duties, But we also hope that people will understand that what we do represents something much deeper than entertainment. Marcus stood frozen on the restricted palace grounds, staring into the cold steel eyes of Guard Williams. The entire courtyard had fallen silent except for the distant sounds of London traffic. Everyone expected to see the loud American tourist arrested, handcuffed, and dragged away by palace security. But what happened next surprised everyone, including Marcus himself. Very slowly and with great ceremony, Guard Williams began to remove his tall black bearskin hat. His movements were precise and deliberate, as if he were performing an important ritual that had been practiced thousands of times. The crowd watched in amazement as the famous hat was lifted from his head and held carefully at his side. Underneath the impressive military headpiece was a young man who looked to be in his early 20s. His hair was neatly trimmed and his face, while serious, had kind eyes that seemed completely different from the cold stare he had been giving Marcus just moments before. When Guard Williams spoke, his voice was clear, warm, and surprisingly gentle. It carried easily across the silent courtyard so that everyone could hear his words. "Sir," he said, addressing Marcus directly, "you seem to be having quite a bit of fun out there making jokes about our traditions and our service to the crown." Marcus nodded weakly, not sure if he should run, apologize, or continue trying to be funny. His mouth felt dry, and his hands were shaking slightly as he realized that he was having an actual conversation with one of the famous guards he had been mocking. "I was just, having some fun," Marcus managed to say, his voice much quieter than it had been all morning. "I didn't mean any real harm by it." Guard Williams smiled then, and it transformed his entire face. The stern military bearing softened into something much more human and approachable. He looked like any young person Marcus might meet at a coffee shop or college campus, not the intimidating figure he had seen just moments before. "I understand that, sir," the guard replied. "Tourism is important to our country, and we appreciate visitors who come to learn about our history and culture. But I have a question for you, if you don't mind." Marcus nodded again, still not entirely sure what was happening but relieved that he was not being arrested or shouted at. "Would you like to know what it's really like to be a Queen's Guard?" Williams asked. "Would you be interested in learning about the real story behind these uniforms and traditions that you find so amusing?" The question caught Marcus completely off guard. He had expected anger, punishment, or at least a stern lecture about respecting British customs. He had not expected a genuine offer to learn something new. Yeah, Marcus stammered. "I guess that would be interesting." A crowd of tourists began to press closer to the barrier, sensing that they were about to witness something special and rare. Many of them had visited multiple royal sites and had never seen a guard break from his post to have a real conversation with a visitor. Sarah crept closer too, her embarrassment temporarily replaced by curiosity about what her boyfriend had somehow stumbled into. She had never seen Marcus look so uncertain and humble, and she was beginning to hope that maybe this experience would teach him something valuable about respecting other cultures. Palace security officers remained nearby, but made no move to intervene. They seemed as curious as everyone else to see where this unexpected interaction would lead. Guard Williams gestured for Marcus to come a bit closer, and then began to speak in a voice that was both educational and deeply personal. "These uniforms we wear are not costumes," he began. "They represent hundreds of years of British military tradition and service to our country. Every thread, every button, every piece of equipment has meaning and history behind it." Marcus found himself genuinely listening for the first time since arriving at the palace. There was something in the guard's voice that commanded attention and respect in a way that was completely different from his earlier intimidating stare. "The hat you were making jokes about weighs over a pound and is made from the fur of Canadian black bears. We wear them in all weather conditions, whether it's blazing hot summer days or freezing winter mornings. They represent our connection to the Commonwealth and our commitment to duty regardless of personal comfort." As Guard Williams continued to speak, Marcus began to realize that he had been looking at everything completely wrong. These were not tourist attractions or living statues put there for his entertainment. They were real people with real jobs doing something that required genuine skill, dedication, and sacrifice. Marcus spotted the gap in the metal barrier, and his face lit up with the kind of excitement that usually meant trouble was about to happen. This was his chance to get closer to the royal guard than any tourist was supposed to be allowed. He could finally prove that these famous soldiers were just regular people in fancy costumes. "Sarah, are you getting this on video?" Marcus called out, but Sarah had already moved far away from him and was pretending to study a nearby statue with intense interest. She wanted nothing to do with whatever crazy plan her boyfriend was cooking up in his head. The gap in the barrier was small, but Marcus was determined to squeeze through it. He looked around to make sure the palace security officers were not watching him directly, then began to slide sideways through the opening. The metal scraped against his bright yellow shirt, but he managed to push through until he was standing on the other side. For the first time since arriving at Buckingham Palace, Marcus was standing on restricted palace grounds. The moment his white sneakers touched the sacred pavement where only authorized personnel were allowed to walk, everything changed. The atmosphere in the courtyard shifted dramatically, like the air before a thunderstorm. Even the other tourists seemed to sense that something serious was about to happen. Marcus felt a rush of excitement and power. He had done something that probably thousands of tourists had thought about, but never dared to try. He was standing just a few feet away from Guard Williams, close enough to see the individual threads in his red uniform and the shine on his polished boots. "Hey there, soldier boy," Marcus said with a wide grin, speaking directly to the guard from his unauthorized position. "How does it feel to have company on your side of the fence?" The crowd behind the barrier began to murmur with concern and excitement. Some people pulled out their phones to record what they were sure would be Marcus's immediate arrest and removal from the palace grounds. Others backed away, not wanting to be associated with the American tourist who had clearly lost his mind. Guard Williams had been standing perfectly still for over 2 hours, maintaining his professional composure despite Marcus's increasingly disrespectful behavior. His training had taught him to ignore distractions and focus on his duty to protect the palace and the royal family. But now everything was different. Marcus was no longer just an annoying tourist making jokes from behind a safety barrier. He was now a potential security threat who had illegally entered restricted palace grounds. The rules had changed, and so would the guard's response. Very slowly, with mechanical precision that seemed almost inhuman, Guard Williams began to turn his head. The movement was so gradual and controlled that it seemed to take forever. His eyes, which had been staring at a fixed point in the distance for hours, began to shift until they were looking directly at Marcus. The crowd fell completely silent. Marcus's cocky smile began to fade as he found himself staring into the cold, steel-gray eyes of a highly trained British soldier. There was no humor in those eyes, no warmth, and no tolerance for foolishness. They were the eyes of a professional who took his duty very seriously and was prepared to do whatever was necessary to protect the institution he served. For the first time since arriving in London, Marcus felt genuinely afraid. "Oh," Marcus said quietly, his voice suddenly much smaller than it had been just moments before. "You can move." The guard's gaze never wavered. His eyes remained locked on Marcus with the intensity of a predator studying its prey. The transformation from statue-like stillness to focused attention was both impressive and terrifying. Sarah saw what was happening and let out a small scream. "Marcus, get back here right now," she called out desperately. "You need to get back behind the barrier before something terrible happens." But Marcus seemed frozen in place, caught between his desire to continue his performance and his growing realization that he had made a serious mistake. The guard's unwavering stare was unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was the look of someone who was completely in control and absolutely serious about his responsibilities. Palace security officers began moving quickly toward Marcus's location, their radios crackling with urgent communications. But Guard Williams raised one hand slightly, a signal that seemed to tell them to wait and see what would happen next. Marcus swallowed hard and tried to regain his earlier confidence, "So, what happens now?" he asked, his voice shaking slightly. The guard continued to stare at him in silence, and Marcus began to understand that he was no longer in control of the situation. The game had changed completely, and he was about to learn what it really meant to face a member of the Queen's Guard. Marcus was not satisfied with just making faces and taking silly photos. He had heard stories about how the royal guards never reacted to anything, and he was determined to test this famous claim to its absolute limits. He wanted to be the person who finally broke through their legendary discipline and made one of them crack. "Sarah, hold my phone and keep recording," Marcus commanded as he handed her his device. "I'm going to try something that will definitely get a reaction out of Mr. Stoneface here." Sarah reluctantly took the phone but held it low, hoping that fewer people would notice what her boyfriend was about to do. She had a terrible feeling that Marcus was about to cross a line that would get them both in serious trouble. Marcus began telling jokes in a loud voice, aiming them directly at Guard Williams. They started as silly tourist humor, but quickly became more inappropriate and offensive. He made comments about the guard's uniform, his hat, and even his personal appearance. The crowd around them began to shift uncomfortably as Marcus's behavior became increasingly rude and disrespectful. "Hey buddy, do you ever wash that fuzzy hat? It looks like it hasn't been cleaned since the dinosaurs were around." Marcus laughed at his own joke. "And what's with that serious face? Did someone steal your lunch money?" Guard Williams remained perfectly still, but some of the other tourists began to express their disapproval more openly. A woman with a strong British accent spoke up firmly. "That's quite enough, young man. You're being absolutely dreadful. These men are protecting our queen and our country. Show some respect." Marcus turned to face her with an exaggerated, surprised expression. "Protecting from what? Tourists with cameras. I'm so scared of the big bad guard with his toy gun." This comment caused several people in the crowd to gasp. Even some of the other American tourists looked shocked at Marcus's complete lack of respect for the military and the royal institution. But Marcus was just getting warmed up. He pulled a small portable speaker from his backpack and connected it to his phone. Within seconds, loud music began blasting from the device, completely disrupting the solemn atmosphere of the palace courtyard. Marcus began dancing to the music, doing ridiculous moves and encouraging others to join him. "Come on everyone, let's have a real party," Marcus shouted over the music. "Maybe we can get the tin soldiers to dance with us." Palace security officers began moving closer to Marcus's location, but they maintained their distance as long as he stayed behind the protective barriers. Their radios crackled with quiet conversations as they coordinated their response to the disruptive tourist. Marcus noticed the security officers approaching and decided to escalate his performance even further. He began doing an elaborate dance routine that involved spinning, jumping, and making exaggerated gestures toward Guard Williams. He pretended to be conducting an orchestra, with the stoic guard as his unwilling performer. "Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the world's most boring man," Marcus announced like a circus ringmaster. "Watch as he does absolutely nothing for your entertainment. Marvel at his complete lack of personality. Be amazed by his total inability to have fun." The music continued to blare as Marcus's dance became more energetic and ridiculous. He was sweating now from the physical exertion, but the attention from the crowd kept him motivated to continue his show. Sarah had stopped recording and was now hiding behind a group of other tourists, too embarrassed to be associated with Marcus's behavior. She could see that palace security was getting closer, and she knew that their vacation was about to take a very unpleasant turn. Guard Williams maintained his perfect posture throughout the entire spectacle. His eyes never moved from their fixed position, his breathing remained controlled, and his grip on his rifle never wavered. Years of training had prepared him for exactly this type of situation, and he was determined not to let one rude tourist break his professional composure. But Marcus was not finished yet. He had saved his biggest and most dangerous idea for last. As he looked around the courtyard, he noticed something that would change everything. There was a small gap in the metal barrier where maintenance workers had been making repairs earlier that morning. The gap was just wide enough for a person to squeeze through if they really wanted to. Marcus's eyes lit up with excitement as he realized what this meant. He could actually get closer to the guard than any tourist was supposed to. He could finally test the limits of what these famous soldiers would tolerate. As he moved toward the gap in the barrier, Marcus had no idea that he was about to make the biggest mistake of his entire vacation. Marcus decided that taking simple photos was not enough to satisfy his need for attention. He wanted to create something that would make his friends back home laugh and share his videos across social media. The royal guard named Williams stood perfectly still like a statue, which only made Marcus more determined to get some kind of reaction. "Watch this, Sarah," Marcus announced loudly as he pressed his face close to the metal barrier. He began making the most ridiculous faces he could think of. He crossed his eyes, stuck out his tongue, and puffed out his cheeks like a cartoon character. The other tourists started to gather around, some filming with their phones while others looked on in horror at his disrespectful behavior. Guard Williams remained completely motionless. His eyes stared straight ahead at some invisible point in the distance. His breathing was so controlled that his chest barely moved. His hands gripped his rifle in the exact same position they had been in for over an hour. Nothing Marcus did seemed to affect him at all. This only made Marcus try harder. "Come on, buddy, I know you want to laugh," Marcus said in a sing-song voice. "Nobody can be that serious all the time. What do they pay you guys anyway? Do you get extra money for being boring?" Sarah grabbed his arm again, her face now bright red with embarrassment. "Marcus, people are staring at us. This is really inappropriate. These are real soldiers, not entertainment." "Relax, Sarah," Marcus replied, shaking off her grip. "They signed up for this job knowing tourists would be here. If they didn't want attention, they should have become accountants or something." An elderly British gentleman stepped forward and cleared his throat. "Excuse me, young man, but these guards are serving their country with honor. They deserve your respect, not your mockery." Marcus turned to face the older man with a smirk. "Oh, really? Well, I'm a paying tourist, and I have the right to enjoy my vacation however I want. If Mr. Robot here doesn't like it, he can always quit and get a real job." The elderly gentleman shook his head sadly and walked away, muttering something about rude Americans under his breath. This only encouraged Marcus to become even more outrageous in his behavior. He began to mimic the guard's posture, standing rigidly straight with his arms at his sides. But instead of maintaining dignity, Marcus exaggerated every movement for comic effect. He marched in place with high steps, swung his arms like a wind-up toy, and made mechanical beeping sounds. "Look, everyone, I'm a royal guard too," Marcus announced to the growing crowd. "Beep beep does not compute, beep beep." Some of the younger tourists began to laugh and take videos of Marcus's performance. This positive feedback made him feel like he was succeeding in his mission to create viral content. He had no idea that several palace security officers were now watching him carefully from different positions around the courtyard. Guard Williams continued to stand perfectly still despite the growing spectacle happening just a few feet away from him. His training had prepared him for situations like this. He had learned to block out distractions and maintain his professional composure no matter what happened around him. But Marcus was far from finished with his show. He pulled out his phone and began taking selfies while mimicking the guard's pose. He made peace signs, stuck out his tongue, and even tried to balance his phone on his head while maintaining the rigid military posture. "This is going to get me so many likes," Marcus said to Sarah, who was now standing several feet away and pretending not to know him. "My followers are going to think this is hilarious." The crowd continued to grow as word spread about the loud American tourist who was making a spectacle of himself at Buckingham Palace. Some people were entertained by his antics, while others were clearly disgusted by his lack of respect for British traditions and the dedicated soldiers who served their country. Marcus Thompson stepped off the red double-decker bus at Buckingham Palace with the confidence of someone who believed the world existed for his entertainment. His bright yellow shorts clashed horribly with his neon green tank top that screamed "London or bust" in bold letters across his chest. His white sneakers squeaked against the pavement as he bounced toward the famous palace gates like an excited child on Christmas morning. The other tourists around him moved with quiet respect and wonder. They spoke in hushed tones and took careful photos of the magnificent building before them. But Marcus was different. He was loud. He was obnoxious, and he wanted everyone to know he was there. "Sarah, get over here and take my picture," Marcus shouted to his girlfriend, who was trailing behind him, with obvious embarrassment written across her face. Sarah was a quiet woman who preferred to blend into crowds rather than stand out. She had tried to convince Marcus to dress more appropriately for their visit to one of England's most important royal sites, but he had laughed off her concerns. "Marcus, please keep your voice down," Sarah whispered urgently as she reluctantly pulled out her phone to take his photo. "People are staring at us." "Good," Marcus replied with a wide grin. "Let them stare. I paid good money to come to this fancy place, and I'm going to enjoy every minute of it." The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard as Marcus began his performance. He had heard stories about the famous royal guards who stood perfectly still no matter what happened around them. He had watched videos online of tourists trying to make them laugh or move, and he was determined to create his own viral moment. The guards stood at their posts like living statues. Their red uniforms were perfectly pressed. Their tall black bearskin hats sat precisely on their heads, and their faces showed no emotion whatsoever. They held their rifles with practiced ease and stared straight ahead as if nothing else in the world existed. Marcus found this absolutely hilarious. "Look, Sarah, they're like robots," he said loudly, pointing directly at the nearest guard. "I bet they're not even real people. They're probably just wax figures or something." Other tourists began to notice Marcus and his loud commentary. Some smiled politely and moved away, while others shook their heads in disapproval. A group of elderly British visitors whispered among themselves about the rude American, who clearly had no respect for their traditions. But Marcus was just getting started. He pulled out his phone and began taking selfies with the guards in the background. He made silly faces and posed in ridiculous positions, while the guards remained completely motionless. Each photo seemed to encourage him more, and his behavior became increasingly outrageous. "Hey, guard guy," Marcus called out, waving his arms to get the soldiers' attention. "Can you smile for the camera? Come on, just a little smile." The guard's expression never changed. His eyes remained fixed on some distant point, and his body stayed perfectly still despite Marcus's efforts to get a reaction. Sarah tugged at Marcus's arm, her face red with embarrassment. "Marcus, please stop. You're making a scene." "That's the point," Marcus laughed. "I'm going to be the guy who finally made one of these tin soldiers laugh. My friends back home are going to love this." He began to walk closer to the barriers that separated tourists from the guards. The metal railings were there for a reason, but Marcus saw them as just another challenge to overcome. He had come to London expecting entertainment, and he was determined to create it himself if necessary. The guard he was targeting was a young man who couldn't have been much older than Marcus himself. His name tag read Williams, and despite Marcus's increasingly loud and inappropriate behavior, he maintained his professional composure with impressive discipline. Marcus had no idea that his actions were being carefully observed by more than just embarrassed tourists, and that his behavior would soon lead to consequences he could never have imagined. As the minutes passed, Marcus discovered muscles he never knew he had. His calves burned from maintaining perfect balance, his back ached from the rigid posture, and his arms felt heavy from hanging motionless at his sides. The mental concentration required was equally exhausting as he fought against every instinct to move, look around, or relax his position. The crowd continued to watch in amazement as the transformation unfolded before their eyes. The loud, obnoxious tourist was slowly being replaced by someone who was genuinely trying to understand and respect the tradition he had been mocking just minutes earlier. Sarah watched from behind the barrier with tears in her eyes. She had never seen Marcus put serious effort into anything that didn't directly benefit him, and she was witnessing a side of her boyfriend that she had never known existed. "You're doing well," Williams encouraged softly. "But remember, we often stand like this for hours at a time, in all weather conditions, while remaining alert for any security threats or emergencies that might require immediate response." The full magnitude of what the Royal Guards did every day began to sink in for Marcus. This was not just standing still for tourist photos. This was a demanding job that required exceptional physical conditioning, mental discipline, and personal sacrifice in service to something greater than oneself. By the time 10 minutes had passed, Marcus was struggling to maintain his position. His entire body was trembling slightly from the effort, and sweat was running down his face despite the cool London morning. He had gained a new and profound respect for Guard Williams and every other soldier who performed this duty with such apparent ease and grace. As the minutes passed, Marcus discovered muscles he never knew he had. His calves burned from maintaining perfect balance, his back ached from the rigid posture, and his arms felt heavy from hanging motionless at his sides. The mental concentration required was equally exhausting as he fought against every instinct to move, look around, or relax his position. The crowd continued to watch in amazement as the transformation unfolded before their eyes. The loud, obnoxious tourist was slowly being replaced by someone who was genuinely trying to understand and respect the tradition he had been mocking just minutes earlier. Sarah watched from behind the barrier with tears in her eyes. She had never seen Marcus put serious effort into anything that didn't directly benefit him, and she was witnessing a side of her boyfriend that she had never known existed. "You're doing well," Williams encouraged softly. "But remember, we often stand like this for hours at a time, in all weather conditions, while remaining alert for any security threats or emergencies that might require immediate response." The full magnitude of what the Royal Guards did every day began to sink in for Marcus. This was not just standing still for tourist photos. This was a demanding job that required exceptional physical conditioning, mental discipline, and personal sacrifice in service to something greater than oneself. By the time 10 minutes had passed, Marcus was struggling to maintain his position. His entire body was trembling slightly from the effort, and sweat was running down his face despite the cool London morning. He had gained a new and profound respect for Guard Williams and every other soldier who performed this duty with such apparent ease and grace. After what felt like an eternity but had actually been only 12 minutes, Guard Williams gently placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You may relax now, sir," he said quietly. "You have experienced enough to understand what we do here." Marcus's legs nearly gave out as he stepped back from the rigid attention position. His entire body was shaking from the physical and mental effort of maintaining perfect military posture, and sweat had soaked through his bright yellow shirt despite the cool morning air. But something much more important than physical exhaustion had happened during those 12 minutes. Marcus had been transformed in a way that he was only beginning to understand. As he looked into the patient face of Guard Williams, tears began to form in Marcus's eyes. They were tears of shame for his earlier behavior, but also tears of genuine respect for what he had just experienced and the man who had made it possible. "I am so sorry," Marcus said, his voice breaking with emotion. "I had no idea. I thought you were just standing."